All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to ACRT, that is Agile Coaching Roundtable. Today is our guest speaker session for the month of August. And for this session, we have Dave Smith as our guest speaker. So let me introduce Dave to you all. So if you guys are on LinkedIn and if you are following me, you might be knowing that Dave, I do follow Dave a lot, and he's a great personality in terms of agile community, and he's a trainer. He's a training professional with extensive experience in design, creation, and delivery of consultancy training and coaching across the range of diverse technical and service management topics to many globally recognized brands. So you can imagine the amount of knowledge that Dave has, and it is a great pleasure to have him on ACRT as our guest speaker. And the topic for today is it would be an open discussion. So the discussion and Q&A on project versus product mindset in Scrum. So what we would be doing is we would request you to post your questions on chat, and Dave would be picking up the questions as per his choice, and he would be answering the questions, and it will be more of discussion. This is not the usual session that we have like every guest session. This is like typical Q&A and discussion session. So please start giving your questions over chat, and Dave would be picking up from there. And over to you, Dave.
Splendid. Thanks very much for that. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully people will see the screen there. Okay. Can I just get a quick thumbs up from people? Can you see my screen okay? Just use your reactions to give me a quick thumbs up. Yep. Or the physical one in the camera, that's even better. Okay, splendid. Right. So thanks very much to Ramya for inviting me to this one. And the topic originally was project versus product mindset, which is still a topic we're going to discuss. But as I discussed with her before, I'm quite happy with any questions coming up, and I don't really care how it deviates. So we don't need to stick rigidly to this. Hey, that's the part of Agile, isn't it? Be flexible. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do is just start off when we talked about project and product mindset. So I'm just going to draw a couple of diagrams here. Okay. What I'd like to do is begin with what we mean by a project. Yeah, I know you've come here to do an agile chat and we're talking about projects instead, but bear with me on this one. Now, with a project, you've actually got a person involved here who's probably the most important person in the project. Now, people say, oh, that's the project manager or that's the project sponsor. Actually, it's got a very simple term. The customer, the beneficiary of the project. All right, some people say, well, that's a project sponsor. Not often, because in some methodology or some frameworks, they do actually say the project sponsor is the person who's actually paying for it, but the project customer is the main recipient. Now, how I think about this is, think of your daughter's getting married. The daughter is actually going to be the customer. It's her day. This is her who's going to benefit mainly from it, but you're going to be paying for it as a father. You're the sponsor. So you open the wallet, but basically it's your daughter is the one who actually needs to have a great day. Now, she will have a deliverable, some idea of what she wants for that day. What will then happen is that there'll be a project scope, and then there'll be a project manager down here who actually says, let's work out what this actually means in terms of time and money. Okay, so they come up with a project plan or a project schedule, and out of all of that, they say, okay, it will take that amount of time and it's going to take that amount of cost. So from here, our project scope, we then have time and cost, our typical iron triangle of projects. Okay, and then what happens is the project manager then, as the project is undergoing, ends up following that plan wherever it deviates and tries to get it back on target. Now, okay, those of you who are project managers or involved in project management will know this stuff. Sorry, I'm mansplaining it a bit here. And I know there's a lot more to it than that, but that's pretty much the basics, isn't it? Think about it. What does a project manager do? Number one, create a plan, and number two, stick to it. And that's really what a lot of it is about. Now, in this time, when they're actually planning, there will then be the project board, and the project board will talk and interact with the project manager, who then talks to the project support office and communicates instructions down to team leaders, who underneath have subject matter experts. And all of these people are the people that are actually doing the work packages. So right at the bottom here, you've got the workers, the people executing all the work of the project. And generally, team leaders will communicate consumption metrics or how much of work packages we've got through. Those will go to the PSO. PSO will use that to create report, to pass them on to the project manager, who will then reassure the project board everything's working fine, or communicate different instructions down to the team leaders if things are going wrong. And it's basically working in a bit of a circle like this. Now, here is the problem. Down the bottom here, we've got subject matter experts who are actually doing the thing. But who's the person who's going to benefit? They are all the way up here. And there's quite a distance between the two of them. Now, I've been involved in situations where, as a subject matter expert, I've been discussing things here and I say, can we just talk to the customer about this? And the answer is no, you're not allowed to talk to them. Okay, can the team leaders talk to them? No. Right, project manager, are you allowed to talk to them? Well, sometimes they show up on the project board, but often it's a project sponsor I communicate with. Okay, so you're talking to the guy who's got the wallet, but you're not talking to the lady whose day it is. And it just seems a bit strange that there's a separation between the two. Now, another issue you find is that project managers often are quite focused on this thing here, the actual plan. They want the plan to tick away, they want it to work properly, and the scope is fixed, and what they do is manage time and cost. What happens when we start to overrun? We throw more costs at it, we throw more overtime in order to try and catch up. Or what we may end up doing is de-scoping the project. We may reduce a few things. So as a result, because of reasons of time, your wedding cake doesn't have 4 tiers, it only has the 3. Or we couldn't afford a band, but we have got a DJ in, but we still managed to do something for the day. That's pretty much good. Now, we talk about scope here and how we may de-scope things, but project managers generally dislike the idea of these things changing. They want to keep this fixed and they want these two to be massaged so that they can keep within the right constraint and still deliver this. Okay, so they've got a word for this, scope creep. And they think if you change that, then all of these have a knock-on effect. But sadly, that is what's going to happen. Okay, so even though I've got an idea here, and this is based on a couple of flawed presumptions, one of which is right at the beginning, the customer said, we want that. So we, as a supplier, design, develop, build, test, and release that, only to find the customer has actually done that. Now, why did the customer do that? Why did they want that instead of this thing? Why didn't they stick in a straight line? Well, there could be a number of reasons. Number one, the customer's an idiot. It's Henry Ford that said that, okay, not just me. But he said customers don't often know what they want. Now, it could also be the customer knew what they want, but they weren't very good at explaining it. So we got the wrong idea. Or there could be other things that happened here. So we didn't know COVID was going to hit. We didn't know we were going to get locked down. We didn't know that there was going to be a monsoon. As a result, the customer was forced to change, but we were made unaware of it. Now, many project management methodologies or various service management frameworks will tell you sometimes the customer will not tell you of changes going on. So what we need to do is do it the other way around. Now, within projects, and people will tell you, well, waterfall is about doing everything and delivering it right at the end. That's not strictly true, because within a project, there may be milestones or phase gates. There may be a certain point at which there are checkpoints. And these are the points at which you determine, have we actually gone off track? And then do we actually need to start changing our direction? In other words, chasing a moving target. Now, one of the reasons I'll talk about that for projects is that Scrum basically does this idea. All it says is don't make the project 18 months, just make it a month. At the end of the month, analyze, are we still heading in the right direction? If not, keep changing. So it's all about embrace and change idea. Okay. Now, we start talking about projects. I'm also going to talk a bit about Scrum and Agile. I'll put those 3 up there because these are all something to do with the management of change. That's really what they're all about. Okay. Right, just check that sorry, I was just looking for any questions. I saw some typing going on, but I haven't seen any questions yet. Now, in the middle of this, I am just going to mention another framework by the name of XP, Extreme Programming. So has anybody here heard of XP? Okay, so just give me a quick thumbs up if you've heard of XP. I'm not going to ask you questions about it, don't worry. Okay, so Vivek has, right. So if you haven't heard of XP, you may have heard of some things that XP does. For one example, something in XP, there's something known as a daily stand-up. Hang on, daily stand-up. Well, we have those in Scrum. No, you don't. In Scrum, it's called a daily Scrum. And people will often moan about the daily Scrum was actually a daily stand-up stolen from XP. But then there's also a stand-up in Lean. So, sorry, in Kanban. So Kanban people may complain XP stole that. And in fact, it turns out all of them stole this idea from a different group of people. The group of people were the Japanese. They had this idea of actually having quite short, meaningful meetings. Okay. Now, some people in Scrum talk about the number of meetings you get. It's just very meeting heavy. However, when they talk about that, what they don't say is how much time do they spend in meetings. Now, let's take an analogy. Let's say Vivek's always eating. Now, that doesn't mean Vivek gets up, immediately goes into a restaurant and spends all days in a restaurant. What it means is he walks around with a bag of nuts in his pockets and he's often just taking some small nibbles. That's what the meetings are in the Japanese world. Now, their idea is you are actually working, you're productive, you are delivering value to the organization, then the customer. When you have a meeting, you stopped working, you are no longer delivering value. Therefore, we need to get at the meeting and carry on delivering value again. So their idea is the meeting is not to do with value. But wait a minute, when we're working here and we suddenly hit an obstruction, we need to have a meeting. So their mentality is not don't have meetings. Their mentality is make the meeting short, make it brief, get to the conclusion, get an agreement, job done. So their meetings aren't 2 hours sitting around a boardroom with 5 topics to talk about. Their meetings are go grab a coffee, stand around the coffee machine. You've got 10 minutes to come back with a proposal for me. It's pretty short and sharp. As a result, they don't have chairs. They stand up. That's their stand-up meeting. And that's where this idea came from. Okay, now we'll just talk a bit more about XP. As well as a daily stand-up, you may have heard of things called user stories and also story points. These actually come from XP, they're not a Scrum thing. Okay, and as well as story points, there's velocity, but you may want to read up about what Ron Jeffries said about story points and velocity. He apologizes for creating them. It's not his fault, they're just being wrongly used. But one aspect I want to cover here in terms of XP is that XP says we should take the customer and take the subject matter expert and put them on a table next to each other. Okay, they said put these two people in front of each other because these are the people that think they know what they want, but these are the people who've actually been creating it before. So why don't we get these people involved and talk to them? Now, this actually is quite common in a number of organizations where they say, let's get the subject matter expert in and discuss stuff. Let them bounce ideas around so that this person's got an idea of what's going on. And sometimes this is one failure, one criticism of projects where the actual planning and activities and scope and solution has actually been designed by or influenced by the project manager or people higher up the chain that don't have the same expertise as these people lower down. Okay, now this concept of why don't we simply sit the person down, the customer, along with this person, funny enough, is something you may find in what's called the Agile Manifesto. So let me drag that over. There's something there about business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. Now, by business people, we're not necessarily saying these are managers in the same organization. It is all about we should actually have all of the stakeholders, all the people collaborating together. And similarly, the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and with development is face-to-face conversation. Okay, so it could be Teams or Zoom, but it is all about discussing and talking. This concept here is all about these things. It's all about the meetings. It's all about collaboration. So if people say, well, Agile and Scrum is very meeting heavy, yes, it is. That's the point. They're very short, sharp meetings in order to get people synced up, get them to discuss stuff, move on again. Otherwise, you carry on in one direction and you haven't spoken to these people who've then gone off in another direction. Okay. Now, I did say, why do customers actually do that? Why do they deviate? Well, we could talk about why they deviate and how we can stop them from deviating. But at the end of the day, the agile mentality is they're going to deviate either because by choice or because of unexpected arrival. Something's going to happen. In other words, never accept that a project scope is always fixed. There may be changes to it. And Agile only says, what do we do with it? Now, that is something, again, at the principle there about welcome changing requirements, even late in development. Okay, so this idea about what do you do about scope creep in Agile, there is no scope creep. It's called changing requirements. It's called we found something new. We need to re-steer. We need to reorient. We found a flood. We found a tree down. We've got to do something different. Okay. Right, let me just shift that to one side. Now, I'm just going to return back to this diagram because one other aspect that has been discovered in studies or projects isn't this picture. It's actually the following. Sorry, let me just stick to the same color. It's actually the customer did that and the developers did that. Okay, it turns out they had these ideas and they kept changing their ideas, but they never got back to the customer and showed them this. Now, how do you prevent that from happening? How do you prevent people deviating? Well, if only we had regular meetings between the suppliers or the people building the solution and the customer or the people on the receiving end, say, let's have this once every month or once every couple of weeks, and we talk about this is what we think you want, and the person could say, actually, I'd like it slightly different. You know, what Scrum calls inspect and adapt, or what it calls a sprint review. And that's the whole purpose. The sprint review is actually the product review or a review of the increment of inviting feedback from stakeholders. Okay, so any questions on that so far? I haven't seen any questions getting raised there. Any queries on that? Any feedback? Any points? Don't all rush at once. Okay, not a worry.
Like you can ask any questions if you have to Dave and he would be answering you. You can also type in your questions. I mean, that is the most preferable way. So please keep asking your questions.
Yep, ask away. Okay, so that is when we talk about, let's go back to your original question here of a project versus product mindset. Now, I see people talk about XP and Scrum, and I've seen people talk about, well, Scrum is a project management, is involved in project management. No, it's more involved in product management because when we start, as I said before, we start to have a focus on the plan. We start to follow the plan. We're then a bit focused on the process we're following, and we forget about the actual product we're doing. And there was a study with some UK projects when they found that at the end of the project, there was very little to show for it. And actually said the only thing they had to show was lots of plans, lots of reports, lots of documentation, but this thing never actually showed up. There was nothing there, but yet the person was following the plan to the letter. Or maybe we ought to forget a bit about the plan and stick to this thing here. Then that's one of the reasons why in the agile world we do talk about plans are good. Do make plans. There's sprint planning. There are plans and designs, but don't consider them completely immutable. Okay, and my feeling about plans are draw your plan in such a way knowing that it's going to be changed. So don't spend a great deal of time on it, otherwise you're going to spend a great deal of time reworking. So as an example, here is one of my training plans. Okay, so it's just a diagram of things I need to cover, and I've got that stuck up on my wall, and some stuff I've crossed out now because it's no longer relevant. Okay, so when people talk about making plans, your plan could actually be a list of 5 bullet points on a sheet of paper. That's simply it. So this was actually my plan for the session, a quick scribble, a quick drawing. I just had some ideas. Okay, right, so right, where are we? Oh yes, one other point before, I mean, people can throw questions in, but I'll just throw another one. People, when we talk about the project versus product mindset, I like to think when people say, what is Agile all about? And we can point them at the manifesto. We can talk about all the different principles. But for me, the principles are all about implementation of what the Agile pillars are about. But the core bit of Agile is actually in this phrase here. Now, I say the core bit of Agile, people talk about the Agile Manifesto, but that's not what that's called. It's called the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. Okay. In other words, it's not the Agile Manifesto, it's the developing software in an Agile way manifesto for that. So it has a specific purpose. Okay. So this is all about agility in a software development environment, but many of these could be applied outside of software development. And a lot of people are. So think about you go into a restaurant and I've had a nice meal and there's a pudding. It's a sticky toppy pudding with custard. And I think I like that, but I remember the days at which custard used to be quite thick and stodgy at school. So I don't really want it with the custard. So I asked the waitress, can I have it without custard? And she said, no, that's how it comes. Okay, fine. I won't bother with the pudding then. Okay. But yet when I go back to the same restaurant and I see the pudding there, I ask a second waitress, could I have it without the custard? And she said, yeah, we can certainly do that. I think, okay, there's somebody who's willing to make a change for the customer. But yet on a third visit to the same restaurant, I actually said, can I have it without the custard? And the response is, yeah, that's not a problem. We can do that. But personally, I find it a bit dry. Would you like it with some cream or ice cream instead? Or maybe you just like a complimentary coffee on the side because you may find it a bit dry. Now, those are three different responses to the same question. The first one wasn't willing to budge. Now, it turns out the first waitress, she actually didn't know whether or not she could serve it without custard, but it was too much effort for her to actually go into the kitchen and ask. The second waitress had already asked because she'd had that situation previously, so she already knew the answer. Okay. But the third one wasn't just giving me an answer of yes, we can do that, but she was also giving me some alternatives. Now, this is the reason why it's very valuable to have SMEs in on there. Often, what the customer asks for is not what the customer wants, more importantly, not what the customer needs. Now, for this, I'm just going to draw another diagram. By the way, many of these diagrams are stolen from ITIL. So if you're interested in where this stuff comes from, have a read up of ITIL if you don't know about it. So here's another diagram. Where are we now? Where do we want to be? How do we get there? Now, this is something from ITIL's continual service improvement. It's about what is current reality, what is the vision? So what are our endpoints? Now, some of you may recognize this as, well, what could actually be our definition of done? What's our definition of ready? What is our entry criteria, our exit criteria? What is it we're trying to achieve? Problem solving, the same diagram crops up numerous times. Okay, but this bit, how do we get there, is all about the project. Now, what I found when I went out to a number of customer sites, people often had done where are we now, where do we want to be? How do we get there? And then they approached us and they said, we want you to do that bit there. What they didn't do is say to us, we need to get there. So they were telling us what the solution was. Now, if they told us this is the problem we're trying to fix, then we could have said, well, this is actually a quicker route, or this may take you a bit longer, but it will be less disruptive on your organization. So we can do stuff in the evening and then carry on maintain stuff during the day. It's a phased approach. It's going to take longer. Okay, but as a result, it may be better with business operations. Now, we're told this is the end result, this is the problem we're trying to fix, then we, as subject matter experts, can say, let's absorb that problem, understand it, and propose different solutions to you. And in some ways, that's kind of what a user story is about. It's a bit of a description of what the problem is, and then the card, conversation, confirmation, fleshing out into requirement is a subject matter expert's idea of building a solution. So the user story is not a requirement, it's a promise or a conversation about the requirement. Okay, now I just want to talk about that because if you want to read up a bit more about that, and Prem, I did see your question there, sorry, have a read up about what's called the XY problem. The XY problem is often, I've got a problem with X, Y is the solution. So people, I then get people to help me to do Y without realizing actually the problem I want to solve is X. Okay, right. So Prem, come back to you. Feel free to ask your question.
Is it okay if I ask the question slightly related to the topic, Dave? At the
Yeah,
same
go
time,
for it.
so you were showing that manifesto, and I'm sure this question is going to help everybody. So this manifesto of agile software development, right?
Yes.
So there are 3 words. And most of us keep talking about waterfall project management, which you referred in your slide right now, Dave, where you explained us the entire flow on your left hand side. And then we say that agile is another way of project management, right?
No,
Because
we're. Oh, sorry. Carry on.
yeah, so now there are 2 questions. The first question is, how do I basically clear myself between agile software development, which is basically software agility, and the project management, which is basically process management, right? It is more like a process management in those days of PMP and other stuff. So could you please explain these 2 aspects first, and then I'll have my second question, Dave.
Okay, right. So to come back to your first bit, and I do like that point. I've had many people that talk about agile project management, and there's many people that say, well, the whole definition of a project, and by project here, we could be talking about Prince, we could be talking about ICEB, is that a lot of things are fairly fixed and rigid. However, that doesn't mean they need to be fixed and rigid. So Prince 2 is a framework for project management, but it should be adapt and apply. Okay, so take the ideas. You're not forced to do everything. You're just being inspired by specific aspects that have been put in guidance and think, well, yeah, we'll do that. We need to do risk management. We don't need to bother with inventory. So you just pick and choose things. Now, I've talked to people about agile project management. I agree there is no such thing as an agile project. There's no such thing as an agile framework because frameworks and projects are not agile. People are agile. That's the important thing. Agility is found in a person. Now, if I take a project, I can have 2 project managers. One of them that actually says, we're going to follow this by hook or by crook, and the beatings will continue until the morale improves. And then you've got another project manager who actually says, I recognize this is the main person. We are going to ensure that they keep coming on the project board. If they're not on the project board, we're going to record the meeting and we're going to call them up and send the information to them. Now, I attended a seminar on of project managers, and some big names in project management were asked to give one piece of advice. So they just came up and they gave a piece of advice. Now, one project manager actually said, bring me bad news early. I don't care what it is, but bring it early. Now, what they were talking about was risk management. They want to know about these deviations. Bring it to me early. We can then fix the problem. You sit in it, I'll rip you a new one. And that was their mentality. Another one had an interesting take, and he said project management is relationship management. It's nothing about process. It's all about people. It's about meeting the right people, talking to them, reassuring them. And you've drawn a plan, but frankly, that plan can go out the window. Okay, once you know what you need to do and when you need to do it, you can do that. Now, I've got somebody I follow online, William, I can't remember his name, but I remember he contacted me when he was just moving into the Scrum area, the just learning Scrum and agility. But he came from a project management background, and he and I discussed a great number of things. And after a while, he said the bit to do with Scrum is a mini project. So, and this is something we discussed. I said one of the problems is that people think this is the project, and what you do is you divide it into sprints. That's what Scrum is about. It's actually the other way round. Scrum is the following. There is one project. After that project, you then do a second one. After that project, you do a third one. After that project, you do the last one. Because some of the typical areas or the typical timeline of a project, there's going to be the initiation, which is the project setup. Okay, then there's going to be the execution, which is the doing, and then afterwards there is lessons learned, or which some people actually call lessons identified but never actually learned. Okay, and this consolidation stage, the project teardown, when you do the closure, you assess how well things went. All of this is basically what sprint retro is about. Okay, the retrospective is that. So Scrum is basically do one project. You've got a project scope. It's actually called the product. It's called the sprint backlog. Oh yeah, we load that with user stories. No, you have a goal. From your goal, you keep pulling things out of the backlog that actually meet that goal. Your backlog should be value driven. So you pull out the important ones, work on that, job done, go back and grab the next one, go back and grab the third one. You don't fill your backlog ready with stories. That is a rigid approach. Be agile, be flexible. Because if you fill it with stories, what happens if those stories or those requirements change during the sprint? And you may see some diagrams that say there can't be any changes during a sprint. No, the Scrum Guide doesn't say that. In fact, it does the reverse. It's actually saying inspect and adapt, be agile, be flexible, embrace change. If you're halfway through a sprint and you find the customer has changed their mind or there's some disaster where we can't do this, you re-steer. You don't just carry on plowing in one direction when the customer's gone there. You find out they change direction, you follow them. It's chasing a moving target. So do one project. At the end of that, assess what's going on, create the next project plan, and the next project do that one, then the next one, then the next one. So in fact, Scrum contains projects, not the other way around. It's not a project contains sprints. Okay. Now, when we talk about agile project management, so Prem, I'm just going to return to your point here. Can you do agile project management? Yes, you can, but it's not the project that's agile, it's the project manager. So my colleague William and a few other people, when I've spoken to them, they talk about some of the things they did on the project, and a lot of it is to do with stakeholder engagement and stakeholder analysis. Just a question, has anyone come across RACI here? Has anyone heard of that? Give me a quick thumbs up if you come across that.
Yes, it's kind of a matrix. Yeah. Responsible, accountable, consulted,
Good.
informed.
Yes, and I've often thought RACI actually means consulted, who needs to be in on the meetings, and informed, who needs to get an email of the minutes, who do you need to tell. But often, sometimes these two, there's a bit of a blur in between them. But for me, RACI is understanding the level of interest of stakeholders. If you don't do RACI, then the project manager won't know who to go and tell. And often when I've had this situation, when I've been at client sites, I have been talking to a project board and project manager or these kind of people and actually say, what do your team want? And they've come up with a list of things. And I'll then look at those and think some of those are a bit strange. What happens if we do this? What happens if we do that? And their response is quite simply, hang on, let me go and ask Bira to come in. Let me go and ask Mohammed to actually come in and talk. Why aren't I talking to these people? These are the people on the receiving end. They're probably the people that know what they want. So as a result, I'm talking to the wrong people here. Okay. Right. So in terms of agile project management, can you manage a project with agility? Yes, you can. There's a lot of people that talk about problems with waterfall. But if you think about where waterfall came from, it was coined by William Royce of the Air Force, who actually studied how projects were done. And he never, sorry, it wasn't coined by him. He never came up with the phrase waterfall, but he talked about these different levels. And as the story goes, it turns out he described to people, this is how projects currently work. And everyone went, yeah, great, let's do that then. And then he said, and here's the problems. And he described the problems and he turned around and there was nobody in the room anymore. They'd heard the first bit, they didn't listen to the second bit. And if you read his paper, he's actually telling you the way in which projects fail is because people do not take a flexible approach to it. He was actually espousing the idea of agility years ago. He was pointing out these are the things you needed to do. Now, I'm just going to come back to, so Vivek, I'll come back to your question as well, because there's another bit of prems I just want to cover. Okay. Now, I've been slightly harsh here by saying it is mainly for software development. Yes, it is, because it fitted in the software development side. But all the times you read these principles and you look at all of these, I think I can describe the manifesto, the Agile Manifesto and Manifesto for Agile Software Development as we are always looking to try and make things better. And when we find a better way of doing things, so that's what it talks about, when we discover a better approach, we then share that approach. We don't sit on it. So we're constantly evolving and we're helping the entire world to actually move to a better and better way. Okay. But I think if somebody said, can you describe Agile to me? What I will say is in the principles, but it's not mentioned here. I think Agile is all about put the customer at the heart of everything we do. Okay, now you may have heard the phrase, the customer is always right. I don't know if anyone's heard that. Just give me a quick thumbs up if you've heard that. Okay, does anybody know who said that? The customer is always right. Okay, it's a bit strange. It turns out nobody actually said that. There was a businessman, I don't know if it's Warren Buffett or Rockefeller, but he actually said the phrase, the customer may not be right, but they are always the customer. And he then said, your job is to make sure they're your customer, not somebody else's. So it's all about pleasing the customer. Okay. So I think a lot of this is about understanding how the customer fits into what we do, and as a result, making sure they're involved in everything we do. Okay. Now, just going to go back to Vivek's point there, and Prem, I'm going to give you the opportunity of asking your second question. However, let me know if I did ask your first question properly.
You absolutely answered my first question, Dave. Thank you so much. A lot got clarified, and thank you so much for being so exhaustively explaining that. I really appreciate that. If you want to take Vivek's question, you can go ahead and take. Otherwise, I'll put my second question as you wish.
Okay, splendid. Yep, splendid. Okay, so I'll quickly do Vivek's. So each Scrum is considered a mini project. And in fact, the Scrum guide mentions that. Okay, so why should we have a product mindset over a project mindset? I don't think actually having a project mindset is the wrong approach, because I keep citing this guy, William, because he's a very good example of disproving the phrase project managers make crap Scrum masters. Okay, I keep hearing a lot of people say that. They say if you're a project manager, you won't make a very good Scrum master. I think that's the wrong answer. I think so. We'll just say, Kartik, who's we'll just pick on Kartik. I shouldn't do, but I'm going to pick on Kartik with this one. Kartik's a project manager. Can he make a good Scrum master? We should forget about the is a project manager bit. Let's push that to one side. We're asking the question, what do we need to do to make Kartik a good Scrum master? So there's understanding Scrum, understanding people aspects, understanding coaching, understanding that a good Scrum master sits on these. They basically don't do anything. They just use that bit there. They're asking questions. They're actually getting people to do the work. I mean, that's the point of coaching. They're not directing and yelling at people, but what they're doing is getting people to learn what to do. So eventually the Scrum Master starts backing off and can quietly fade away in the background and let the team get on and do things. By team, I mean the developers and product owner. So I often think of a Scrum Master as being a parent who's equipping their children ready to go out in the world. So if they're going to hover over and be a helicopter parent, then these kids are going to grow up to be teenagers and not have any life skills whatsoever. It's the reverse concept. You're trying to prepare them to actually be resilient and self-organizing. That's the idea. So I would say not what does a project manager need to do, it's what does that person need to do. Okay. Now, part of the reason why people say project managers make rubbish Scrum masters is because an organization thinks Scrum is a project management methodology. There is Pradeep, who's a project manager. Let's make him a Scrum master. Yeah, but we need to teach him a bit about Scrum, don't we? No, we don't. It's a project management. He's a project manager. He knows what to do. That's completely the wrong approach. And for me, what is quite tough for some project managers is they've only known project management. As far as they're concerned, everything is a project. It must have a budget. It must be signed off, and project's a way of doing it. Therefore, it's very difficult for them to lose a lot of the mindset they've got here. It's just so entrenched. But that doesn't mean a project manager cannot make a good Scrum master. It's a matter of what do they need to do to become a good Scrum master. And the first thing is understand what Scrum is. Understand that it isn't about project management methodology. But there are some project managers who are actually very agile. They're very good at customer relationship management. They're very good at risk management. They're very good at getting involved. They're very good at bringing donuts in the morning with coffee and just chat to their team. They keep the team on side. Everybody likes them. And the success of the project is down to them pressing the flesh, them being close to the people mostly involved. And I think that's exactly the same mindset that you should have in Scrum as well. Okay. Now, with Scrum, should we have a product mindset over a project mindset? I think you should have whatever mindset that makes this person happy. Okay, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's a testing mindset. If you're great at doing DBA schemas, if you actually know all about Node.js and you do a lot of HTML, at the end of the day, this person is the person you need to make happy. And if you make them directly happy, or you do something for the SME where the SME can make them happy, do that. It's a team effort. So sometimes you're not directly involved, but you as a Scrum team are going to be judged on the results. You're not going to be judged on half results. Customer doesn't come along and pay for half things done. They're not interested in you showing them a recipe and talking about how we're going to sous vide this and how my mix and bowls are made of that. That's all tool set is rubbish. They don't care about what tools you've got. They care about how great the meal is. They want to see the meal at the end, and it's all about results. Okay, so be results driven. If that means being product driven, then fine. If it means you need to have a project mindset in order to achieve that, do that as well. What I will say is that many people I've spoken to with a earlier project mindset that don't understand some of these do become quite focused on the process. They do seem to be quite process and planned and metrics focused. Okay, now I'm not saying these people aren't. I've met people in the Scrum world that are very velocity obsessed, or the user stories have got to be rewritten. I mean, none of that is actually to do with Scrum. Velocity and user stories are all over here. But people, if you are going to use user stories, and I do recommend you do, they're actually pretty good, understand the 3 C's. I'm just going to pop it up there. Okay, the 3 C's: card, conversation, confirmation. Okay, and in terms of a user story, I often tell people a user story, okay, is the following. It is a sentence at the top of that page. What you then do is sit down with the customer and you say, you talked about that bit there. What did you actually mean by that? And then we start adding more information here. We add diagrams, you add all of this stuff. Now, the user doesn't get to see any of that, or maybe they do. Maybe you can show them a prototype, a diagram. Okay, so how would you want to do this? What happens if that doesn't work? And you can start building a bit of your design there. But fundamentally, the user story is all about the subject matter experts trying to discover what the user actually wants. The user story in itself does not make a requirement. Okay, right. So hopefully I've exhausted that bit. So sorry, Prem, you want to ask your second question again? I realise we're a bit short on time. I don't want to carry on talking. So what is your second question?
Yeah, just give me a second.
Well, the Sargandri is about to ask a question as well.
Yeah. So my second
Prem.
noise on my laptop. My second question is around agility. In a lot of articles you see there is technical agility people talking about. There is process agility that people are talking about. Now in Scrum, definitely we get agility through process, and as you example, extreme programming, we get agility through in the technical aspects. So the question that I have is that in the normal scenarios where Agile is talking about agility, can we say that agility is being brought both through technical and process, or is it that agility lies only in people, as you rightly said? Because moment you said that Agile is all about people, I was almost going to think about process agility and technical agility, Dave, where I slightly got confused. Yeah, that's my
okay. That's actually a very good one. Now, I'm going to be, I could be firm on this, but even then I shouldn't really be. I maintain that you've got products and processes that aren't agile and people are. Now, by saying not agile, what is a process? Basically, it's a sequence of steps you need to go through, and it could be represented as a diagram. So here's a diagram of what we do. And in ITIL, there's something that they call the incident management process. Now, the process chart talks about all the different steps you go through in recording and investigating and resolving an incident. But there's also something called a major incident, and there's other things. There are exceptions to that. Now, ITIL actually says we're very keen on the idea of process charts to describe what 80% of people do. But what you've got to understand is that not every activity can always be mapped to that. So 2 things to understand here. Number 1, the map is not the terrain. So the diagram of the process does not completely, fully tell you what the process is. It gives people an idea where to start, and after a while they learn there's many things that's missing from there that they've got to do. Telephone manner on the phone when people call, the ways in which the tool works. It's not mentioned in the chart, but you do need to record it somewhere. So it doesn't have each and every part in there. Now, similarly, people should understand the process, the diagram should be something to work from, but should also be something to deviate from in the situations where it doesn't suit. So again, think about the 3 waitresses. So the first, And second waitress pretty much said, yes, we can, or no, we can't. But the third one actually says, yes, we can, but we can also do this as well. Now, this isn't anything to do with the process. This is to do with the person. This is a person being flexible and deviating from the instructions because they're interested in the customer's outcomes. Now, can a process be agile? No, but when I worked for the armed forces, they used to have something called standard operating procedures, and I'll just pop them over here. Okay, standard operating procedures, which were basically a diagram. Now, the standard operating procedures were stuck to the desk, and there was a date at the bottom when they were last updated. And the idea was those do not go more than 12 months without being updated, without being reviewed. So whoever was in that seat, when they left, the next person who came along read the instructions and followed those. And of course, they were new to it. They didn't fully understand how to do it all, but that gave them a good start. And gradually they understood how to do it. But then they'd find another way of doing it. And what they would do is actually add to the standard operating procedure. They would update the process chart. And then the next person came along, would then make a slight change as well. Maybe a tweak for the language. Another person would actually get rid of something because there was something outdated on that one and we no longer needed it. Now, this is the idea of processes changing over time. And that's something that ITIL's CSI actually deals with when they say every process, every service, every product, everything should be subject to scrutiny. It should be reviewed and evaluated as to, is it working the best way it is? So 2-3 years ago when we had it, yes, it was working fine. Now we've actually got mobile industry, we've got a whole pile of different technology, techniques, other things that we can bring in there. Now, you may have also heard the term technical debt. And people often think about technical debt as cutting corners and doing a bit of a shoddy job. We'll come back and fix that later. But if you watch the video where, who's his name? Kent Beck? Somebody was talking, sorry, Ward Cunningham. It's Ward Cunningham. He was talking about technical debt. He cited something, and it's something I didn't realize. He said, when you build something, you build it with the knowledge levels you've got now. Then later, you learn something more. So what you should do is go back to the stuff you built and review it and improve it. No, hang on, it's working. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, the trouble is, if you don't fix it, it will break. Okay, so you should start applying new learning retrospectively to older products in order to bring them up to the quality levels that you're used to. Now, I fell foul of this. Many years ago, I wrote some applications where there was some PHP talking to a MySQL database, and I used some PHP methods that were available in PHP 3. PHP 4, they're available, but they were going to be deprecated. But it still worked. I didn't care. PHP 5, it fell over. And I realized there was a newer way of doing it. So I then put the newer ways in. And then it suddenly occurred to me, I shouldn't put this in the middle of the code. I should put this to one file to the side when I can just update these, and all of these talk to that file, and that file then talks to the database. So without realizing it, I'd refactored and moved them out as a series of interfaces. It then meant when PHP 7 and other systems came along, or I changed to a different database, there was this one file I had to change, and the rest of the code wasn't dependent on it. So I soon learned how to design for change. And when I spoke to somebody about that, they said, yes, that's one of the design patterns. Now, what you've done is learn something that they call loose coupling, understanding about decoupling aspects. And this is actually a technically agile way of doing things. What you're trying to do is come up with a design where if you need to change one thing, there isn't a whole pile of things that cascade down. Okay. Now, to come back to Prem, your other point about, you mentioned about Scrum talks a bit about we could get process agility in Scrum. Well, I think you actually get people agility in Scrum as well, because let's drag the Scrum guide over here, because one thing in the Scrum guide is to do with the team. When they talk about the team consists of the following, there's no sub teams, they're cross-functional. Okay, they internally decide who does what, when, and how. All of this is about letting the team decide. Okay, so if you just go back to one of the principles here, we've actually got, there we go, build projects. I should really think of that as being build products, but build it around motivated individuals. Okay, the best architectures emerge from self-organizing teams, and the bottom there basically is what the review is. Now, I'm just going to take a bit of a sideline here. I mean, I recognize you probably understand this already. Many people say Scrum is our way of implementing agility. That's not strictly true because Scrum came before Agile. Many of these things are actually based on what Scrum said, but also on what Lean, Kanban, DSDM, Crystal, XP, so on and so forth came about. Okay, right. So can we do Scrum and become Agile? Well, if you're doing Scrum and you're not Agile, you're not really doing Scrum. That's what it boils down to. There's so many things in there: empiricism, learning, actually getting better at things yourself by looking. Okay, this is all to do with Agile or to do with agility. And furthermore, there is the point about that Vera Scrum and Prem Scrum and Andre Scrum are all going to be different because it's different environment unless they all work for each other. Now, Andre asked a question a bit ago, and sorry, I've been a bit rude in missing that one. What about bug handling and production? Okay, does it absorb well in a project mindset? Well, in a project mindset, bugs, let me see. Projects often talk about quality issues. Okay, so they talk about what is a minimum quality to reach. So when I talked about the iron triangle of those 3 points, actually there's 4 points. I think it's now become 6 points in Prince. Okay, but when we talk about bugs, firstly, we need to understand what are these flaws and what do they mean for us. So ideally, we don't want any bugs, but bugs are a fact of life. There's no product without any bugs. It's just a matter of what is the impact of the bug. So when you are doing your development and you do the testing, somebody doing testing, I won't call them a tester because it could be a programmer, it could be anybody. Somebody doing testing will find these bugs. The bugs will then need to be reported back with what is the impact of the bug? How severe is it? If it's something minor and it affects 0.3 of our workforce, forget about it. Just go with it. It's a big showstopper. Okay, we can't do a release. And it's all about what does it mean for us? Okay. Now, there is thought about in Scrum, and in fact, the Scrum Guide actually says this when we talk about the product backlog, it talks about it's an emergent order list of what's needed, and what could actually be in there could also be bug fixes that need to go in. But a lot of people in the Scrum world will tell you if you're working on something and a bug comes up, get it fixed now. Okay, so basically, if you haven't got it fixed, you haven't met your definition of done. If you haven't met your definition of done, it ain't going to be released. And that also comes to another point when people say, well, the sprint review, we can only show products that are done. Well, why? What happens if it's half done and then you show them something and they say, well, hang on a minute, that's not quite right. We wanted the following. Would you have actually preferred to wait until it was fully done? You spent all the rest of the effort only to be told that. So sometimes showing people where you currently are and just getting their feedback, do you like that idea, is a good idea. So I don't think it needs to be done. But I would also argue, if you know a product is flawed and how it's flawed, I often think it's a good idea to do this during the demonstration, during the review as well. Just this is how it works. We've got a problem here that when you click on this, the screen goes white. We're going to be fixing that. But if you do want it in the next iteration, we will just hide that so you don't click on it. And then the iteration after it should come out. Okay, would you like that or should we just hold it back? At the end of the day, it's all about this person here, isn't it? The customer. Okay, now bug handling production, I think. Well, I've got I've got some viewpoints on bugs and testing. I think number one, the product will always be tested. It's either tested by you now or it's going to be tested by a paying customer later. Who would you prefer to actually find the bug, you or them? Secondly, a bug actually increases in cost to fix the longer it goes into production. So we need to think about trying to get it fixed earlier. Okay. Having said that, every software contains bugs. We can't polish it completely. Okay. Now, I also think in terms of the product backlog for Scrum, where do bugs go in the backlog? Well, I think do they even need to go into the backlog? I think if they're serious enough, they just get thrown into the sprint backlog or they get thrown into the sprint. Guys, these are things we need to fix. They're not part of the sprint goal, but we do need to get them done. Okay, afford them some time, do what you can with that. And it could be a case of let's just get through those. Now, I know my company had for a while, they had something called Bug Fix Friday, which was Monday to Thursday. They're working on their backlog, their all of the work they said they would do. Then Friday, they put it to one side. And Friday was all about fixing bugs or improving quality. So they did a lot of bug squashing. Now, if you don't do regular bug squashing, don't forget, every product contains bugs. The more products you create, the more bugs you're creating. And eventually, you're going to have a huge amount of products with low quality. I would prefer a small amount of products of better quality. And that's actually something Apple used to be good at. They reduced their entire product lifecycle down to a very small amount of products. In fact, Steve Jobs did that when he first started. When he restarted at Apple, he pretty much sacked most of the project managers and said, I'm going to hire 5 of you. You're going to all come back and justify your projects to me. I'm going to keep 5. Rest of you are going. And basically he said, let's have small number of projects, get good quality, get something out the door. And if you want to know about a project that failed miserably, have a look at Duke Nukem Forever. There's a great article about Duke Nukem Forever. Oh, look, age go to. Okay, I can't see it there, but there is a great article about how this was a project that went on for about 14 years and it kept changing scope. Okay, right. Sorry, I just suddenly realized I'm running out of time. Okay, so I'm going to throw the session back to Ramya.
Yes, that was wonderful, Dave. I mean, there were a lot of insights that we have definitely learned. And I love the way you answered each one. I mean, in a very detailed manner. I mean, though the question was the smaller one, but then you ensured that you answered every bit of it by linking it to some references or giving some analogies. I mean, that was amazing. So really, it was a wonderful session, and I hope that everyone has learned at least something from this session. And thanks for answering my question also, and I got a very good perspective on that. So next time someone tells me, I know what to answer them. So thank you so much for this wonderful session, and thank you everyone for joining. And looking forward for more sessions from you, Dave, and looking forward to a lot of learning from you. Thank you so much for joining with us today.
Splendid. It's been enjoyable, and they were deep answers because they were very deep questions. Good questions, people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Ramya. Bye.